There's a pretty one, Ulysses. There it is.
Hello, BookTube! I'm Sean the Book Maniac, and I am so excited because it's time for Women in Translation Month, starting August 1st, going the whole month. Some lovely people on BookTube, Kendra Winchester, I'm not sure who else is involved this year, are planning a Women in Translation readathon somewhere near the end of the month. Those details are not yet available. If I remember to do so, when those details become available, I will update my show notes with that information. But in the meantime, I'm not willing to settle for some week-long readathon. I want to read Women in Translation for the whole month. And that's what I'm going to do. I think I have one book that I will be buddy reading that is Women in Love by D.H. Lawrence. So it's almost Women in Translation. Just that last word is different. Oh, that's so corny, Sean. Edit that out. But yeah, otherwise, here's my TBR of everything else. My sole focus shall be Women in Translation. I did this last year and loved it so much. So here's my TBR. And maybe should I take a Valium to get through this video, or just have a sip of wine? What do you think? First, here are the buddy reads that I'm planning to do for Women in Translation Month. The first is this collection of short stories from India, more specifically from Telugu, and the title is what first sucked me in. It's called Father May Be an Elephant and Mother Only a Small Basket, but ... by Gogo Shyamala. And this has umpteen translators, I think too many for me to list in the show notes. Each story is translated by one or two translators, and so there's 12 stories, and I think at least 12 separate translators. Very obscure, very hard to find. I was so excited about it that when I received this 6 months ago, I did a book haul video specifically devoted to this book. And I will be buddy reading this with Amelia of Amelia Reads. Unfortunately, as far as I'm aware, she does not yet have her own channel, but she is an avid, to put it mildly, she's an avid reader and avid commenter on many of our channels. And this will be our very first buddy read. I will link to my quote-unquote book haul video where I talk more about this and read an excerpt from it. I'm so excited to finally be getting to it. Another writer that I have been wanting to read for the first time for a year, since I discovered her when I was preparing my TBR for last year's Women in Translation readathon, is the Welsh language writer Kate Roberts, who died, I'm not sure, 20 years ago in her 90s. And is considered the mother of Welsh literature. She wrote exclusively in Welsh, and her debut novel, I'm pretty sure it's her debut, Feet in Chains, is on Scribd, and I read a biography of her in English. It was kind of a weird it was a weird and fascinating introduction to read an English language biography of a Welsh language writer whose fiction I had never read, but that's what I ended up doing as part of the Women in Translation readathon last year, and finally, 1 year later, I will be reading her novel, Feet in Chains, and this will be a buddy read with Bitter Bowler, and I'm so excited! The translator is Kate Grammich, and she is also the author of the English language biography that I read last year. I will link the biography as well in the show notes. Kate Roberts died in 1985. She was 94, and I'm not sure if Feet in Chains was her debut novel. She had written collections of short stories prior to that. Feet in Chains was published in Welsh in 1936. I will be reading this German novel, The Seventh Cross by Anna Sagers, translated by Margot Batower-Dembo, who I think just passed away a few weeks ago. Sadly, we lost a couple. Yes, she just died, I think, earlier this month. Margot Batower-Dembo, and she was the translator of this novel. One of the most powerful, influential novels in the 20th century. A hair-raising thriller, alerting the world to the grim realities of Nazi Germany. Anna Sagers died in 1983, in her 80s, and this novel was published in 1946. I've heard really good things about it. I'm doing it as a buddy read with Cecilia, who is not a booktuber, but she is an occasional watcher of booktube, and she's very active on Litzy, and she has her own NYRB Books book club in Singapore. She's been a guest on my channel a couple times, so we're going to be buddy reading this. This is one I didn't quite get to for Women in Translation Month last year, so I'm going to try again. I think I'm going to get to it, and this is a Quebecois Canadian novel, Anne Hebert's Kamouraska, which the cover image is just to die for. Matches my blouse. Translated from the French by Norman Shapiro, and it's considered a classic of Canadian literature, which I don't think I'd ever heard of until I saw this edition, based on a true story about a 19th century love triangle in rural Quebec. And I will be buddy reading this later in August with my dear Litzy and bookish friend who I got to know on Litzy, Leah from Calgary. And the last buddy read, and certainly not the least, is I have raved about this, the Norwegian novelist Cora Sandel's Alberta and Jacob, which I read last year. Loved it. Loved it. One of my top reads of 2018. Published in 1926 in Norwegian. And that's volume 1 of a trilogy. So Celia of BookTube fame, Celia, and I will be reading volume 2 of the trilogy during Women in Translation Month this year. Alberta. Oh, I got the wrong one. Just a sec. All right. Alberta and Freedom, and I am so excited to continue the series. This is the second novel in the semi-autobiographical trilogy, translated from the Norwegian by Elizabeth Rokkan, and Alberta and Jacob was just a marvelous translation. This one doesn't give an original publication date in the Norwegian, but first published in English in 1963. So that's 5 buddy reads. That's not bad. That's manageable. The only one that's a little bit chunky is the German novels, The Seventh Cross. The other ones are fairly short, average length. So now moving on to my other top priorities. I hope to get to all or most of these as well, and that's eminently doable, I think. I've been wanting to read this book for months and months, since long before I actually possessed a physical copy. Waking Lions by Eilert Gunder Goshen, an Israeli novel, translated from the Hebrew by Sandra Silverstone. I heard about it on a Book Riot podcast like 2 or more years ago. When was it published? 2014, yeah, 2 or more years ago. I heard about it on a podcast. I think it was a Book Riot podcast. And then Britta talked about it on her channel, and that intensified my interest. And it's on Scribd, but I saw this sale copy, and I snatched it up because it's a lovely hardcover. So this is about a Israeli neurosurgeon driving home after an exhausting shift at work, and he hits someone who ends up being an African migrant worker who is killed, and it's a hit and run. But the widow of this African migrant tracks him down, and that's all I need to know. And I will be getting to this for sure for Women in Translation Month. Another fairly chunky one that I would really like to fit in August is Segu by Maryse Condé. Maryse Condé is she won the Not the Nobel Prize last year. She's a Guadeloupean writer, born in 1937. Translated from the French by Barbara Bray, and this is an African historical novel beginning in 1797 in the, I'm assuming, fictional, mythological African kingdom of Segu. It is almost 500 pages, so I'm going to get started on this right away and hope to finish it up during the course of the month. But if any of these carry over, last year a lot of the ones that I started during the Women in Translation Readathon took me several more weeks. A couple of them, some of them my most favorite, took months more to finish. Doesn't matter, but I'm going to certainly start it in Women in Translation Month. I think Eric Carl Anderson has mentioned Natalia Ginsburg, and maybe some other booktubers have too, and it was always a name. It's like, I should know that name. I don't know anything about that, and that just kind of came back into my awareness as I was putting my TBR together several weeks ago. I started, and I never do this, but I put a tweet out saying, hello, bookish Twitter. I never do this, but Can anyone recommend where I might start with Natalia Ginsburg? And Matthew of MCS Books was the one who recommended. I don't know if I can't remember if he'd read it, but he had heard that this was really good. So this is Family Lexicon by Natalia Ginsburg, translated from the Italian by Jenny McPhee, and it is about a sizable Italian family with all its routines, rituals, crazes, pet phrases, and stories. Thanks, Matthew! And this is the Blame It on Eric. This is going to be maybe one of the heaviest reads, I'm guessing. I had forgotten, actually, that it was a memoir, but I ordered it after Eric talked about it in a book haul video. The Little Girl on the Ice Floe by Adelaïde Bon. Translated from the French by Ruth Diver. So brand new release this year. And it is a memoir of the author's rape. And apparently extremely powerful. The last one that I would consider to be a top priority is a novel from Africa. The Word Tree by Teolinda Gerceo. It was translated from the Portuguese. I don't know where she was born. She's a Portuguese writer, but this novel is set in colonial Mozambique and translated from the Portuguese by Margaret Jewel Costa. I don't know if Gerceo herself was born or grew up in Mozambique. I will find out more about that, but I've heard really good things about this, and it's very short, and I am going to get to it. I think this story is set both in Portugal under their dictator Salazar's reign and Portugal's colonial wars in Africa. I haven't mentioned it yet in this TBR video, but since I heard this lovely phrase from Cousin of Always Doing, I often use it in my TBR videos. So those are my top priorities. I hope to get to all or most of those, but there's quite a few others that are on my pile of possibilities. So I would love to get to at least a few of these too. So first I'll show you the physical books that I have that I would love to get to. This is actually a gay novel, but it's by a female Greek writer. What's Left of the Night by Ursi Soteropoulos, translated from the Greek by Karen Emmerich. It's a novel based on the sex life of the poet Constantine Cavafy. I really should have put this as a top priority, but I'm going to read it whether it's in Women in Translation Month or not. Yūko Tsushima's Child of Fortune. For the readathon last year, I read her Territory of Light and absolutely loved it, and so I'd like to get to this. Speaking of Japan, this is a collection of short stories by an older female Japanese writer, Taeko Kono, Toddler Hunting and Other Stories, translated from the Japanese by Lucy North. And I love that cover, and I don't have any other short stories on my TBR, so it would be nice to fit these in. It is more than 250 pages with fairly tiny print, so I'm not sure, but it's on my pile of possibilities. This is a collection of novellas. Fish Soup by Margarita Garcia Robeo, translated from the Spanish by Charlotte Coombe, and set on the Caribbean coast of Colombia. An Iranian novel, The Gardens of Consolation by Parisa Reza, translated from the French by Adriana Hunter. Somewhat controversial, Booker International long-listed novel, The Pine Islands by Marion Postman, translated from the German by Jen Kalaja. And Beside the Sea by Veronique Olmy, a French writer, translated from the French by Adriana Hunter. And in terms of other stuff that I have access to on Scribd, a novella, The Faster I Walk, the Smaller I Am by Kjersti Annesdatter Skomsvold, a Norwegian writer, translated from the Norwegian by Carrie Pierce. And this one came out last year, and it's a short novella, Farewell My Orange by Iwaki Kei, translated from the Japanese by Meredith McKinney. A collection of short stories from Thailand, Arid Dreams by Dunwad Pimwana, translated by Mui Popoksaku. And last but certainly not least, I found out about this on Cousin of Always Doing's channel. Night School, a reader for grown-ups by Sophia Ban, translated by Jim Tucker and Sophia Ban. Hey, I'm redoing the audio here because I mangled the description of the author. She was born in Brazil to Hungarian parents and grew up in Brazil and Hungary. She writes in Hungarian. There you go. I corrected the mistake. And I don't remember many details about what Cousin said when she wrapped it up, but it sounded intriguing. So, what do you think? Think that'll do me for the month? Are you joining in the fun? Are you planning to read any of these? Do any of these sound interesting to you? Thanks for watching.